sounds so young for a question. I can do that. Not awkward at all.
All right, well, thank you guys again for taking the time out of your very, very busy schedules to help me out and come and hear this presentation on really trying to increase interactivity between students in class. We're going to do a kind of a short Nearpod present presentation that outlines what the research project was, what we did, and what we found out as a result of doing it. And then we'll have some time for questions and answers at the end. So first of all, to start with, we had to create a problem, or determine a problem that we wanted to try to find a solution for, which then kind of informed the purpose of our study. My research partner and I looked at student motivation in mathematics and just really trying to increase their activity in the class and hopefully increase their like, or how much they like the math that they're learning by increasing their activity. And I hope that would affect their motivation. We also talked about engagement, especially this time of year. You guys all know students start to tune out. So we're looking at ways to improve engagement and really get them actively learning rather than passively learning. And then we also talked about ways that we can improve student achievement. Obviously, that's a key focus for any school, helping kids to reach their fullest potential. And so we looked at ways that we could use interactive gaming and interactive lecture notes to increase engagement. So to kind of sum all that up, we came up with 2 research questions. You read a little bit about those in the sample Nearpod activity. But we did a whole bunch of review of relevant literature that exists out on the internet now. And a couple of things that we found about student achievement and engagement and motivation. The more exposure students have to technology, the higher their achievement and motivation becomes. This is a generation of kids that don't know life without the internet. Like, we remember it very vividly, right? They don't. So the more that you can incorporate technology, the literature says, there's typically a correlation between the amount of technology that you're using and their motivation, which then leads to higher levels of achievement. In terms of student interest, Clark and Ernst said games place students in an active role within their education. So again, active education versus passive education, which can in turn improve their motivation and thus create a more positive attitude towards education in math class. And so our research questions were, our primary research question was, in what ways will interactive gaming and interactive lecture notes improve or affect, not improve, but affect student achievement? And then our second question was, in what ways will interactive gaming and lecture notes improve student motivation and engagement? So a little bit about the participants in the study. As we said earlier, it's a joint project. My research partner is a high school, she's a pre-calculus teacher in the Tustin Unified School District in Orange County. And so her school specifically is in Santa Ana. She used her 2 sections of pre-calculus honors, which was about 50 kids out of a student body of 2,500. And of course, you guys are familiar with our school. So I used my 2 Algebra 2 honors classes, which is roughly 51 students, or 55 students. But a few opted out of the study, so it ended up being 50 students out of the student body, with roughly 16 to 50. The methods. Basically what we did was 2 things. We looked at Nearpod, and we used Nearpod as a way to deliver content. Now there's 2 different modes that you can use Nearpod in. If you're familiar with Nearpod at all, previously there was a traditional mode where everything that you guys just did would be projected on the screen. It would also be projected on your laptops, and I'm 100% in control of what you see. So I'm doing all the clicking, right? I select the pace at which we're moving. It's all teacher-centered. The mode that you guys used today was homework mode, right? They call it homework mode, but it's a self-paced interactive mode. It does all the same things that traditional mode does, but it allows the kids to move at their own pace. And so I used the homework mode primarily, largely because I felt like it was a good way to increase the interaction amongst the kids in class. So things like the open-ended question that you answered. Talk to your partner about what you expect to learn today, write an answer in. Those are the sorts of things that I would use to get them to interact. It was a great way to facilitate conversation amongst the students. And then I get that feedback right away. So kind of a win-win on both sides. There's also the quizzes, which you took. So again, I'm getting some real specific data about whether or not they're learning the material that needs to be learned. The biggest thing was, particularly because we're a one-to-one school, using Nearpod in homework mode gave me the ability to float around class to each group and work with individual students that Nearpod is showing me is having a hard time, or if I hear a conversation about something that's off topic or kind of going in the wrong, maybe on topic but going in the wrong direction, I can easily go around to that group, have a conversation with them about whatever the topic was that they're discussing. So it freed me from the traditional, I'm at the board, the kids are all kind of sitting at their desk. It gave a lot more freedom for everyone to move at their own pace, and for me to keep an eye on individual students as necessary. So that was one part of our study. And then the second part was, once we completed certain parts of the unit, we use an interactive game called Kahoot, which Chris Kozor has actually been talking a lot about recently, to review the concepts that were learned through Nearpod. So Kahoot is sort of like a Jeopardy style game. I'll give you guys a sample in just a minute. Sort of like a Jeopardy style game where you earn points for correct solutions. One of the caveats to that is if two people select the correct answer, the one that selects it first, faster, gets more points than the other, right? And so after each question, the leaderboard comes up on the screen, and the kids can kind of measure themselves against each other. It's really kind of a fun, interactive game that we used for review. And so that essentially is what happened during the intervention. All right, so you guys have already done the Nearpod activity, kind of saw how everything's laid out from a teacher's standpoint. But I want to give you an opportunity to take a look at Kahoot really quickly also, so that you get a sense of what the kids experienced with Kahoot. So, if you will, on your device, go to well, not even www, it's kahoot.it. Kahoot.it. I'll pull up a really quick session for you, so that you can see sort of what the kids, just get an idea of what the kids experience on our review days. All right, so when you get to Kahoot, it's going to ask you for a login, much like Nearpod did. Here's your PIN number, 737245. Katie's the first. Right, you'd be surprised at how much they wanted to compete in everything. By the second day, it was who can get their name up there first, who can have the funniest name. It was really pretty interesting, but clearly they were all engaged, right? They were all actively involved in what's going on. There was no issues with kids being on their iPads doing something else or working on another class. They were all very actively engaged in what was going on. Mr. Mean Game. All right. So what's going to happen is a question is going to come up on the board, and you're going to have an opportunity to choose red, blue, yellow, or green to select the solution. Again, remember, whoever selects the solution fastest gets the most points. So the question up at the top, 1 plus 1, here are your answer choices.
Where's my name?
All right, everybody got it right. So again, you can see that instant feedback piece as well. Of course, if students were missing questions as we're going through them, I'm reviewing it on the board for them. Right, but again, that instant feedback piece, and then once I click next, it shows you the leaderboard. Right, so it's going to do that after each question. Watch, I think this sample one has 3 questions. You ready for number 2?
Sure, I'm ready.
Oh, we're ready. Here we go. Number 2, how many researchers worked on this research project? Very good. You guys are all paying attention. You haven't fallen asleep yet. Leaderboard's a little closer, but Wendy, still our leader. Last question, how many more school days do we have left before
Wait,
final exams?
Oh my god. I don't know.
I do too.
I think I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong.
You can see the timers going there too. You can kind of
Oh,
control
really?
how much
Yeah.
time is
Yeah.
left. You got 11
I
more school
I just
days.
guessed.
I was wishful thinking.
Now, the guessing piece.
I just guessed.
We'll talk about that in a little bit, but in the student feedback about how they liked Kahoot and Nearpod and how it helped them to learn, the guessing piece was one of the big drawbacks, right? Because, particularly because of the speed element, students just forget about the fact that you're reviewing for an exam or you're reviewing the material learned, and it's all about just getting an answer in quickly. Never mind the fact that you get no points for submitting a wrong answer, no matter how fast you do it, right? So it took a little while for them to start to figure it out. After a couple of days, you had less guessing, right? But that element was still somewhat of a negative for us. Right? Again, you can kind of see the leaderboard, and what we did was, over the course of days, I kept track of the total points, and when we got to the end of the unit, the top 5 kids got a couple extra credit points on their test. Right, and then from the teacher standpoint again, student, you guys can give this feedback if you'd like, but from the teacher standpoint, I can go in and actually download the results of that particular day. And I can see a very clear breakdown of who answered what was the question, what was their total score, all the information that I need, all the same sort of information that I would get from Nearpod, just in an Excel spreadsheet form. So, data collection and triangulation. Triangulation is the process that ensures the credibility of the study through collecting various different forms of data. So, we did a couple of different things. We started with a pre-survey. So, before we even started with the intervention at all, we had students take an 11-question survey that was kind of an attitude scale. So, their appreciation for math, 11 questions basically that gave us a feel for their baseline like or dislike for math, kind of their experience coming into the intervention. And then we also did, at the conclusion, we also did a post-intervention survey with the same 11 questions so that we could measure, one of our measures was comparing the pre-intervention survey results to the post-intervention survey results. And so some of the questions were, I like math, right? Clearly speaks to their like for math, part of our research question. Other things that we did to triangulate the data, each of the researchers kept a reflection journal. So at the end of each class, remember it was 2 class periods for me, at the end of each class, I wrote a quick summary of how class went that particular day, things that I observed, things that were good, things that were bad, but particularly things that spoke to the research questions. So you've got student input, you've got my reflection and my observations as 2 different forms of data, and then we actually looked at their actual grades too, compared their grades in the unit before the intervention started to grades in the unit when the intervention took place. And then I also took grades from, same grades from last year's classes so that I could compare their results this year to last year. And then there were also the fourth thing was some student responses. So the students had some open-ended questions in the post-survey that allowed them to give us some feedback about specific things they liked about Nearpod and Kahoot, specific things that they liked about interactive note-taking, that sort of thing, and I'll share some of those results with you. Yeah. So one of the questions that we asked the students was to provide a concrete example of something that you liked or disliked about Nearpod. Here's 3 randomly chosen responses from students. It allows the teacher to get involved with the students when they're working on examples. This also allows the teacher to help students more and see what they are doing wrong and help them improve. Second student, the ability to work at my own pace on individual problems and being able to take notes from my iPad was great. Third student, Nearpod allowed group work to be much more organized and efficient. It was also a great way of keeping up with the pace of the teacher as the slides he's on is the slide we were on if you use the app. So this student was either one of ours from one of the days when I used traditional mode, or one of my research partners, students, she primarily used the traditional mode. So by and large, the students really liked using Nearpod. Traditional mode did have a lot more cons than the homework mode did, in particular not being able to control the pace. So some kids wanted to move much faster, some kids wanted to move much slower, and you're kind of stuck moving at the pace that the teacher controls. And then provide a concrete example of something you liked or disliked about Kahoot. Again, I'm very slow and hated the time limitation for each question. Though it was good practice to solve under pressure, it did not allow me to completely understand the questions. So a lot of these responses are really based on how the teacher chose to use the application. So I chose for the questions where I had a good percentage of the kids that got the question wrong. We actually did the questions on the board. So they got the feedback before we moved on to the next question. And then you can see a couple of other good student responses here as well. This one was pretty common. Kahoot is good in that the competition of trying to get on the leaderboard makes it fun and engaging. Kids really liked the competition aspect of it, particularly our kids. I think that's something that we all know about our students. But generally speaking, even my research partner students liked the competition element and liked being able to see that leaderboard. It was something that kept them engaged, and they wanted to try to get themselves on that leaderboard. Then the second question we asked specifically described how utilizing Nearpod affected your ability to learn. So there's some more negative feedback here. I just like Nearpod in homework mode because I had to flip through the slides, and Nearpod is for the teacher to flip through the slides. That was one of ours. Didn't make that one up, but that was by far my favorite response. I know the swiping. I told them I'd make sure that I give them a 10-minute break at the end of class so that they can stretch their fingers a little bit. But other feedback, it allowed me to discuss problems with others and the teacher. Right? So again, that interactivity gave them some very specific things to talk about. And so it really guided group work and group conversations very well. And then obviously required full engagement. Right? There's so many different activities for them to do. And the fact that I'm walking around, circulating the room, helped to keep them engaged. And then the fact that they know that I can see their results helps keep them engaged for sure. The same question described how utilizing Kahoot affected your ability to learn. A lot of the students said it was good practice. That was really the most common response. And the most common con was some kids didn't like the competitiveness of it. Right? It felt like the focus was on the competition and not on learning, which is a very valid response. And then a lot of the kids didn't like the time element, right? Because you're kind of incentivized to just work quickly rather than working thoroughly. Now for a history exam, for example, where maybe it's a true-false question or something that just has a one-word answer, maybe something like Kahoot would be a little bit easier because there's going to be less of a guessing element probably than with math problems where you have to do actually some working out. But I think that the timing element was definitely a valid concern that the students expressed. Almost there. And so our findings, a couple things about what we discovered. First of all, the difference between using traditional mode and homework mode for Nearpod was huge, night and day difference. Almost unanimously, the kids liked homework mode. They liked the ability to move at their own pace. They actually liked having focused discussion questions, so it was open-ended in a sense, but at least they knew what topics they were supposed to be talking about. And again, having all of that information right on their screen, for whatever reason, was easier than reading it from the board and having that conversation. So they really liked that. Whereas with traditional mode, a lot of the feedback was, it's great, doesn't really do a whole lot different than traditional note-taking, but I don't like the fact that I can't move at my own pace. But again, just like anything, there are definitely some times where traditional mode would probably be preferable. Feedback for Kahoot. The biggest thing was that the structure of Kahoot encouraged students to come up with solutions as quickly as possible. Most of the kids liked the competition and it kind of kept them motivated and engaged. So towards the end, I started to look for ways to de-emphasize the timing aspect of it. And because I was keeping a running total from day to day, I added bonus things in. Like I would give them 100-point bonus or 500-point bonus for having 3 questions in a row correct, which I can see, if you remember from the Excel spreadsheet, all the correct solutions are in green, all the incorrects are in red. So it's very easy for me to tell, okay, you got 3 in a row, I'll add 500 to your score. That encouraged them to actually take their time a little bit more now and look for a correct solution rather than just trying to get through and find the answer as quickly as possible. But students were definitely engaged and motivated during those review sessions. Overall, Nearpod and Kahoot can both be effective tools, certainly to increase student engagement and motivation, and the student responses by and large supported that, as well as our own observations. Student academic performance wasn't really affected. There was a slight increase in their scores. So when I compared the unit exam scores previous to the intervention to previous years, this year's students on average had about a 1.5% better score. So they're a little better than last year typically. And on the unit that we used this intervention for, their average scores was about 1.7% greater. So a slight increase, but certainly not enough to make, to draw the conclusion that the intervention itself is what caused them to have an increase in their academic performance. And then the other finding was that the teacher really has to be creative in using these tools. One, you can't do it every day, it's going to lose its value. But things like providing kids with feedback when using Kahoot by doing questions on the board when they don't get the answer correct. That's something that's outside of the normal setup of the system. And so that was something, as I was noticing issues, those are the sorts of things that I tried to come up with to combat those issues. So you really have to be kind of creative about how you're using these programs. One of these days I'll stop pressing down. So in conclusion, the data showed that student motivation and engagement was certainly increased pretty significantly, particularly in the student responses. So when we asked them about their motivation levels, pre-intervention average score was about 3.4, I believe it was, out of 5. So motivated. The average score was about 3.4 something. And then after the intervention, it was like 3.7. Right? So it's, on a 5-point scale, it's a pretty significant gain. Right? But again, in terms of student achievement, really nothing to support that students learned more per se. But they were certainly more engaged. Some of the pros of Nearpod specifically, and a lot of this again is guided by student response and by our own observations. It's a great way to organize notes for kids. Another thing that I did talk about being creative in how you use the program. I took all of the slides. You can create a Nearpod presentation from any PDF. So I would obviously create a PDF with all the slides I wanted, upload it into the system for them to use. But then I also used our learning management system, Canvas, to put those same slides up for them so that they could go back and review them if they wanted to at a later time. So it's a great way to organize notes for students. It's a great way to facilitate small group discussion. The checks for understanding were really huge, really huge. Gave me a very targeted data that told me exactly who I needed to respond to before they even left class. So rather than having to wait till the next day, for example, to get homework, I was able to deal with a lot of issues right away because of that instant feedback aspect. Again, students did not always receive instant feedback. So once you start making some adjustments, maybe doing some things to supplement some of the bad things about the program, and you can kind of deal with some of those issues. But at least initially, that was part of their part of the cons that the students listed. And it's much more useful if the teacher has a mobile device and is not tethered in one place, right? The ability to walk around, that alone increases student engagement. But when you have that mobile device and you're able to see those responses as you're moving, really big help. In terms of Kahoot, again, the biggest thing was finding ways to de-emphasize the speed so the students were actually using it as a learning tool. And then the site has some connectivity issues, particularly when there's a lot of kids using it at the same time. So you can imagine in an Algebra 2 honors class, there's 32 kids and something like that, 31 kids in one of my classes. And part of it is our wireless network, but part of it is also Kahoot. So they have, it's a relatively new service. So they're still kind of working some of the connectivity issues. And sometimes students would get kicked out and then they would lose all their points from the leaderboard. So I had to go back in and manually look at their results and add those things back together. So hopefully that will improve with site improvements in the near future. And then finally, things for further research. The homework mode in Nearpod is a brand new thing. I'm not sure how long it's been around, but certainly within this school year, it was launched. And so we definitely want to look at how using Nearpod in homework mode can help facilitate discussions versus the traditional mode. We also want to look at how you can use Nearpod to teach conceptual understanding through sense making. Like that's a lot of what the Common Core state standards are moving towards. So looking deeper at how you can facilitate small group discussion rather than kind of procedural math sorts of things. And then last piece for further research, how can Kahoot be used for more than review a procedure-based concept? In math, it's a little bit more difficult. I could see some ways that maybe you can use it in English or a different department for things outside of review. But that's certainly something that will need to be researched a little further. Any questions or concerns that I can address for you? 1 or 2. Yes.
Well, this is my first one, and this might be something that I don't know if you guys addressed it all within your paper, because it sounds like you did all honors classes. Did you at all address how you thought this might affect non-honors classes with, usually the motivation isn't already lower to start, or were there any studies maybe that gave information on that?
We didn't find anything that specified the difference between honors and non-honors classes. My research partner only teaches part-time, so she only has honors classes, and that was a large part of the reason why I chose my 2 honors classes, just so we had some comparable courses, even though they're different levels of honors classes. We wanted to be somewhat comparable. My guess would be that the engagement and motivation piece is going to be, you're going to see bigger gains in a regular level class, for sure. I would be willing to bet money that's the case, but I haven't been able to find any research, or we didn't do any research to support that. Great question. Yes.
I've got a few. Well, just some of what you talked about was that some kids didn't like Kahoot because of the timing issues. So I was just wondering, if there were kind of any special ways that you found, or, you know, extra helpful ways to deal with kids that, you know, are extended time kids, or who really do have issues with processing things quickly, and they are always kind of, maybe they're always the last one. I can't remember if the leaderboard showed only like the top 5,
Yeah.
or if it showed all of them, because, okay, so it doesn't like show the bottom all the time,
No,
which
it
is
only
good.
showed the
but-
top 5.
But I just like, if those kids always felt though, like if they're never up there, if, you know, like, is there anything to address that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think that was part of the motivation for doing things like adding bonus points for stringing together correct solutions, because then now, even though it may not show up on the leaderboard, that kid has a chance to kind of make up for some of the lack of speed by doing things correctly.
Is it just the follow-up, even if it's something that they maybe weren't finishing within class? I'm just, like, if they took like an extra long time, would they still have opportunities to finish enough to even get that? Or is that just not something that you saw maybe in the honors classes?
No, I didn't do anything specifically, but just in thinking right now, you can do things like upload the actual questions that you used in a separate file for them, so that they could go back and use them for further review. Most of it, you do have control over how much time that they have to complete the question. So you guys were taking 5-6 seconds for everybody to answer. It stops once everybody gives an answer. The default setting, I think, is like 30 seconds per question, but you can change it to up to, I believe, 1.5 minutes. So by nature, the program is designed for kind of quick review sorts of things, not necessarily for things that require more thinking or deeper thinking, which was definitely one of the drawbacks. I know in the pre-calculus class that my research partner worked with, that was a much bigger issue. It's a lot more of the questions require more than just a very quick response. So that's certainly something that, again, Kahoot's a pretty young company. Hopefully, you know, I'm sure that they're getting that feedback from lots of folks that are using it. Hopefully that's something that they address in their next.
Does Kahoot allow for free response, or is it just multiple choice?
You know, there is a way that you can, I never tried the free response, but there is a way that you can, so you can set up a quiz, you can set up a discussion, or you can set up surveys.
Okay.
So I used quizzes only, but the discussion and survey pieces may give you an opportunity.
How hard was it to make up the notes when you were using the Nearpod?
Not very at all. So a lot of what I did was take things that I already had pre-made in Word and just save it as a PDF and just drag and drop. And it separates them by page. So, for example, the sample presentation I gave to you today, I just typed each slide on a separate page and then saved it as a PDF and drag and drop. And it puts it all in there for you. It's actually really quick and pretty easy to add slides, add activities through Nearpod. Kahoot takes a little bit more time, but Nearpod for sure is pretty quick.
Were there any topics that like didn't lend themselves to using Nearpod because of like, for the math problem, you needing to do an explanation of something, or was there enough? It's not like, they can't hear an explanation, right? So it's all written, they have to look at the steps.
Well, so for example, we used Nearpod during the unit where the kids were learning logarithms. So very few of them had ever even heard of a logarithm before. And so some, like, the ability to embed videos really helped to deal with that issue, because I could pull something from Khan Academy, put it in there really quickly, a 2-minute video that they could watch and explain a particular topic, and then they can come back and take a quiz or an open-ended survey or something like that about what they just saw in that video. So there's really, Nearpod is as creative as you want to get. There's lots of different ways that you can use Nearpod to facilitate conversation, to do kind of the traditional teacher does a problem, student does a problem. You can do some of that too, right? If you have a particular problem typed out, or even if you took a screenshot of it and just saved it as a PDF, you can put a sample problem in as one slide, and then maybe give them a quiz or a poll or something in the next slide with a similar question, so you can actually test to see whether they're actually understanding the example that you provided.
How many times did you use Nearpod in the unit?
So the intervention was 4 weeks, and the fourth week was spring break week. So we had 15 class periods. I think we did like 9 different Nearpod sessions and 3 or 4 Kahoot sessions.
Equivalent for both researchers, roughly?
Yeah, the time period, yes. The number of times she used it, roughly the same. I think she maybe used it 6 or 7 times.
So in the Nearpod, it seemed, okay, so like what we submitted when it said, draw a parabola or whatever, you said you could click on each individual and look at it, which, is that, well, I guess that's kind of one part of it, is how much of your time then did it take to look at that stuff, but also what kind of feedback then did the students get? Do they only get feedback if you click on it and look, or is there any kind of feedback that they get through their interaction with Nearpod?
So again,
besides, like,
that's one of the things that you have to be creative about. A lot of what I would do, and the students kind of caught on to this, so there's a trust element there, but I would give them, say, a quiz, and then the next slide after the quiz would be the solutions. So Nearpod in and of itself doesn't provide that feedback, but you can set it up so that within the slides they do get the same feedback. Particularly with the drawing activities, I would either like close it into class, or again make one big slide and just add that extra slide in so they could get that feedback right away. That was one of the things that students talked about, though, for sure. They didn't like the fact that, particularly in traditional mode, where they can't go forward and backwards, because the teacher's controlling the presentation. They didn't like the fact that they didn't necessarily get the feedback about how they did on the quiz right away. They're dependent upon the teacher. Now, when you're doing it in traditional mode, when you're using Nearpod in traditional mode, you do always have the option when you get to a poll to project the results, so they can see how many or which question or which response, how many students put in each response. And then eventually, when you get to, once everyone's put in a solution, they can see which one was correct. Right? That still leaves you time to then do the work on the board if you want to explain it, or again, you kind of have to be creative with what's going to work for you. Great question. Yep.
Well, just in your surveys that you did, the pre and post intervention, I'm just curious, because I know we didn't see all the questions that they did. You asked about, if they liked math or whatever. Was confidence also at all an issue that was addressed, or was that addressed by you in the study? Their confidence with their abilities, and
yes,
if this interactive gaming helped
not.
at all?
We didn't ask the question specifically about confidence. But you can see here. I'll make it a little bigger for you guys. These were the 11 questions that we asked. So math is one of my favorite subjects. This was a strongly disagree to strongly agree 5-point scale. I believe math has relevance in the real world. I'm comfortable and skilled in using technology. I enjoy using technology. Excuse me. I enjoy competitive games in the classroom setting. I prefer to play competitive games individually as opposed to in teams. The internet can help facilitate learning in the classroom. I like working individually to read through examples and explanations in order to understand the concept. I believe the teacher should be the only source for an education. Can't believe that one has a 4 right next to it. I enjoy coming to math class. That was one that showed a relatively large gain from pre-intervention to post-intervention, which was a good thing, I think. Our class time is productive and engaging. That's another one that showed a relatively small gain, but some gains nonetheless. So those were the 11 baseline questions, and then we asked those again at the post-intervention. And then we also asked in the post-intervention only for them to rate. I enjoyed utilizing Nearpod in class. And again, some of the open-ended questions provide a concrete example. I enjoyed using Kahoot. This was a 3-point scale. Using Nearpod made me, the blanks were less likely, didn't affect, or more likely to participate in classroom activities. So less likely was 1, and more likely was 3, I believe. And then basically the same questions for Kahoot. So we tried to keep it focused towards our research questions specifically, just so that the data would give us a sense of how the students felt about their motivation and engagement in particular, and their academic achievement. Any others? Well, again, I thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your day to help me out with this. Really, really appreciate it. I'm glad that you guys were here, and hopefully you learned something that you maybe can use in your own class.
Good job.